Hello, everyone. Welcome to Birds and Bees in the Garden, our fourth workshop of the growing season. As always, today's workshop is a hybrid. We have some attendees zooming in while others are joining us here on site in the museum's garden. My name is Katrina Lashley. I'm program coordinator of urban waterways at the Anacostia Community Museum here in Washington, D.C. I'm joined by our garden facilitator, Mr. Derek Thomas, and today's guest gardener, Sam Droege of the U.S.G.S's Native Bee Lab. As always, thank you for spending a portion of your Saturday morning and afternoon with us. Today's workshop continues a garden series currently in its 10th year. Our gardening network grew out of the museum's Urban Waterways project, which has started off as exploration and documentation of urban communities' relationships with their waterways, but has grown over the years into conversations and documentation of our ongoing relationship with the environment as a whole, both natural and built spaces, blue spaces, green spaces, and the gray spaces. Our gardening sessions at ACM are about our connection to, our place in, our green spaces. As always, these sessions are guided by the themes of gardens as places of community and connection to our cultural past, gardens as sites of stewardship, gardens as site of interdisciplinary knowledge, gardens as sites of empowerment and access to good nutrition and healthy living. Our last two growing seasons have been inspired by Barry Farm Hillsdale, an African-American community found east of the Anacostia River right after the Civil War. Our recently retired colleague, Alcione Amos, has traced the history of the community and its people. Last year, inspired by the truck gardens, which served as a means of economic independence and security for residents who tended lots that were a minimum of 1 acre, we planned our modern version of the truck garden. This year, in acknowledgement of the loss of land residents endured over the course of Barry Farm Hillsdale's lifetime, we've been exploring gardening in small spaces and the possibility of maintaining stewardship of and a connection to the green spaces which make up our communities. Healthy green spaces and healthy communities are reflections of each other. Today, we turn our attention to the non-human members of our communities and how their presence in our gardens is a reflection of balance, an indication that community members of all shapes and sizes are contributing to a thriving whole. Today's workshop is in part a collaboration with the National Museum of Natural History. Our colleagues, especially Robert Costello, I want to thank him specifically, introduce us to our guest gardener, Sam Droege, who grew up in Hyattsville, Maryland. Sam received an undergraduate degree at the University of Maryland and a master's at the State University of New York, Syracuse. Most of his career has been spent at the U.S.G.S. Patuxent Wildlife Research Center. He has coordinated the North American Breeding Bird Survey Program, developed the North American Amphibian Monitoring Program, the BioBlitz, Cricket Crawl, and Frogwatch USA programs. Sam also works on the design and evaluation of monitoring programs. Currently, his team is running an inventory and monitoring program for native bees, developing tools and techniques manuals, a bumblebee floral survey for citizens, online identification guides for North American bees, and producing public domain high-resolution photographs of bees, insects, and flowers, which my colleague Janelle will be sharing the links to in the chat. So once again, thank you for joining us. If you have any questions, our Zoom attendees, please feel free to post them in our Q&A panel. And with that, we'll turn it over to the garden and Derek and Sam. Thank you.
Hey, Katrina, how are you?
Doing well, Derek. Good to see you.
Good, good. I can't look at the monitor because it's a slight delay and I'm like waiting for myself to do something. Welcome everyone that's signed in virtually. We've got some of our garden warriors here. I know that there's a group that is supposed to come to partake in today's workshop. As you said, we have a really exciting guest today that's going to talk to us about bees and the importance of bees in our gardens and our landscapes. Today, we're going to also do, at the end after the presentation, we're going to do garden maintenance. And today's plants, which I'll talk about a little bit later, are all plants that can be put into the garden and be used as pollinators. And I'll let Sam kick things off and tell you why pollinator plants are really important in the garden as part of his presentation. So without further ado, I'll give you Sam.
Thank you. Hey, it's really nice to be here. I have to say that I almost never get to talk to people locally, and I have been, and also gardeners locally, and I've been a gardener since I was in 6th grade. And we'll go ahead and start the presentation, but I just want to kind of, it caused me to think about where I grew up and what kinds of things were important in my life and why did I become a gardener and how gardening, and then ultimately, you know, we'll get into the bee part, but I just have been thinking some large thoughts about why plant things, why have these kinds of environments in our own homes. So if we go to the first slide that has pictures, I think, are we shifting? There we go. Okay, let's go to the next one. And we'll show that last slide, which has contact information for me in a little bit. And then let's go to the next one. And so this is where I grew up. So my parents, we grew up in nearby Hollywood, outside in PG County, in a garden apartment. And then they bought this, the left-hand side of this duplex in 1960. Lovely cars back then. And you know what it was? It was basically they took a whole bunch of fill. We're right next to the Anacostia, and they built up the neighborhood with fill. Then they built a basement and threw all the rest of the dirt out into the yard. And my dad could never grow anything out front, but very traditional. So let's go to the next approach, like everyone did back in the day, which is, okay, you know, we have to present with a few conifers. We're going to have a really nice lawn, or try. My dad was never successful at that. And we're going to, you know, do that sort of thing. So if we go to the next slide, but for me, oh, one back. But what was important to me, that just across the street was the Anacostia River and this sort of semi-wild parkland. Now, looking at that, it's not the greatest kind of habitat, right? It's not, they're not the beautiful woods you might find in Rock Creek Park or anything like that, but that's where we played. And this is back in the day when you could actually, like, all the parents just let the kids play wherever they wanted in the woods, completely unfettered. So even when I was in grade school, we were wandering on the woods, building forts and things like that. And that had a huge impact on my life. I just loved spending my time there. And I think that most of us, so this is the larger picture. I think most of us feel better and reconnected. Our souls are fed by walks in the woods and beautiful nature and places like that. And yet then when we go back home, for many of us, not all of us, we go back to an environment that was that at one point, like the house I showed you, was just like this, was all woodlands and things along those lines. And then we removed every stitch of nature, and we dump a bunch of crappy soil on top. And then we try to grow grass, which nature never tries to grow. And then we think like, oh, that's, now we're happy. But I think we need to inspect that a little bit more, and that our happiness is in part would be boosted by actually recreating some parts of nature, which we know feeds us, but we don't connect it back to our homes. So in thinking about those things over the last few days about my childhood, it was like, I didn't spend all my time in the backyard, although you'll see in a second, let's go to the next slide, that we did start putting in gardens. And so this is, my dad took over after I left, and he had gardens, like his dad had gardens, but that was during the Depression, where everyone had to have gardens in order to grow food. So it was like, well, we don't need to do that anymore. We have enough money, we can go buy food at the grocery store. But because I was interested in gardening, he became interested and started doing gardening again. So I think these are the kinds of things that we need to recreate back into people's lives. Like, our backyards can be more a reflection of nature, and we can have gardens that grow our food, but also feed us. Like, we want to be surrounded by flowers and beautiful things, and things that are more of a reflection of the places we go on vacation or go for a walk, that we go, oh, that was so nice being in the woods. But we don't want to go back to a house that's just lawn, but we don't, I shouldn't talk so long about this, but it just got me activated. Like, we don't even think about that. We don't even think that our own homes are not supporting us in the same way that we could if we had brought more plants and things that reflected more where we like to be in nature. So anyway, I'm going to stop. I'm going to shift gears now. We're going to go, next slide, into bees, which is something that I got into years ago. We do surveys, we do development, we try and figure out how many bees there are, how to count them. We're a support group for lots and lots of other agencies and people. And we'll talk about our work recently at the end about which bees go to which plants, and how plants then support bees, and how being in your yard, you can be a bee support group, as we have a bunch of flowers over here that do that sort of thing. So first, a little bit about bees. So bees for most people are honeybees, and we're going to mention them in a second, but we're actually not going to talk about honeybees. We're going to talk about the many kinds of wild bees, none of which give us honey, none of us which really even sting us, but do a lot of the pollination, but we don't think about because we've never needed to think about them. So just a few patterns. So if we look in the US, about 4,000 species. California has 2,000 species of these wild bees. And then we can go down, you can see on the list there, we get to Maryland, we're roughly around 450 now. This is an old slide. DC has 173. I think we're pretty close to 200 species have been discovered in DC. And we'll talk about some DC areas and what kind of native bees are in there. But you're surrounded actually by a lot of different kinds of native bees that you may not be familiar with because they're not, you know, they don't cause you a problem, and you also don't get honey out of them. So you just don't really realize all this diversity right at your back door. So if we go to the next slide now, we'll see, I think, yeah. So on the left-hand side is PG County, where I grew up, and on the right-hand, and live to this day, and on the right-hand side is England. So an interesting thing is there are more bees documented in PG County than there are in all of England. So we think of our area, our region as like, oh, you know, all the interesting things are like Africa or the jungles of South America or all these exotic places. No, we have just as many species and we have just as much interesting biodiversity and interrelationships with plants and animals, and it's anywhere else in the world. We just don't kind of appreciate it. It's like, oh, it's all way over there, but we're surrounded by that. And again, I'm going to emphasize our native plants rather than the exotic ones are the ones that support all the native animals. So we have what, 150 million years of practice by the native plants and the native bees to kind of work out a relationship. And guess what? It's gotten really complicated, and they still need our support by planting these native plants. So we'll go to the next slide. Thank you for being so good on the slides too. Have a slight delay. I'm not.
Hold on,
sometimes I don't
yeah,
know
it's
what
stuck.
block
It's
is.
stuck. So
I
hold
couldn't
on one
say that.
second.
For those of you online, I can see a monitor over here. That's why I'm looking over in this direction instead of over at the audience a lot. Oh, here we go. All right. Okay, that's the next one. Or is there one previous one? Well, we can start here. So just to give you an idea on how many bees are out there and how easy it is to support bees. So here's a picture of a sunflower on here, just your common sunflower like the one back here. So one sunflower, just one sunflower can support over 100 bees. And by support, I mean that there's enough pollen and nectar on that coming off of that one sunflower head to make 100 new baby bees. And so that seems relatively fantastic, but first of all, it's a big flower, right? And it's actually made up of, if we get technical, many, many little flowers. It produces tons of pollen. If you ever took one of those and put it on your dining room table and left it there as pretty, your dining room table is covered with pollen. And then finally, because we're talking insects, it doesn't take that much food to create a baby bee because they're not like us. We're having to heat and cool ourselves the whole time. You know, it takes a lot of energy to run a human. But for a bee, they don't heat, they don't cool, they move in the environment to do their heating and cooling. So their energy budget is really low. And one illustration of that is most of our native species live in the ground. And what's going on is for most of the year, they're under there waiting to emerge at the right time. But the little tiny hole that led to their underground chamber that their mom built, that collapses almost immediately. We water it, we step on it, and yet they're still alive. So if we think, well, what if we put our children underground and then buried them? It wouldn't go well, right? But that's the magic power of insects, is that they need so little energy and oxygen that they can make it in these really rough environments. So in other words, just one simple flower, planting it is a significant gift to the neighboring bees. So having clover in your lawn instead of just straight grass, also good. one potted plant on the patio that has blooms, obviously, is going to be good. And then you expand from that. So the gardens that we see here at the museum are full of bees. You can actually see them. There's so many. And we'll talk about this a little tiny bit. I don't have time. In fact, I'm probably way over my budget of time anyway, but most bees are about the size of a grain of rice. And literally, we've estimated on average, so this is the average, 26,000 bees are produced in the region per acre. So there's a lot out there, but you know what? If you don't have anything blooming in your yard, they're not going to stop. But if you plant it, they'll come, and it's all about plants because they're constantly looking for these plants. So you don't have to worry like, oh, well, my area is so messed up. They're never going to come here. No, you build it, they come. We see that in any particular case. That year that you have bloom, you will have the bees. So it's pretty positive. Let's go to the next slide where I talk for an hour on every slide. So kind of like I was talking about before here, what we're saying is that to support native bees, you need to bring in the native plants. And I'll talk about that in a little bit more detail. And thus, saving bees is about saving plants. So if you want to do something, it's not like, oh, that's a problem, that's Monsanto or some chemical company that's killing everything or the giant developers. No, it's like on you. You have a yard, you plant plants, you can save bees. It's basically that simple with an addenda that says you need to plant a good diversity of native plants. So we'll talk about that in a second. Okay, next. And yeah, and it's not just like, oh, I planted clover, hey, I'm done. No, clover only supports a few kinds of bees. So diversity of native plants, that slide is showing up here, is a diversity of native bees. Next one. And the reason for that is that each bee species has a very small Rolodex, although who knows what a Rolodex is anymore. A small, little, tiny digital file of its friends. So it only goes to a few kinds of plants. There's 4,000 species of plants in Maryland. Most bees are only going to basically a handful. So you don't have their plant, they're not there. Same thing. Each of the native plants is working with a small list of native bees. So both of them need each other, and they're both very tied to certain kinds of plants and bees being located in the area. That's why the natural areas are good, but you can also be helpful by bringing in plants and a diversity of native plants into your yard, and they'll show up. I'm just showing here, we're just gonna, if you could just kind of page through, these are just flower pictures. So I'm just showing you that flowers have, you know this, but I mean, just think about this. If we, just go ahead and keep going until we come to a bee. And they have all kinds of different architecture, right? You have ones with long corollas, you have ones that bloom in the morning, we have different colors, different times of year, some are high, some are low, some have, you know, kind of weird shapes to them. You know, why is that? Why? It's the same reason that there's not the bee, so the honeybee, there's also not the flower. Like the basic flower would be something that would be like a child would do, like here, have a bunch of pollen and nectar. And there's a few plants that do that, but the basic theme is over these 150 million years, plants started working with a smaller and smaller set of bees. And they're like, well, we really don't want to give away this expensive pollen and nectar to just any old other kind of bug that's not going to help us like our friends do pollinate, right? So from the plant point of view, they don't care about bees except that they carry pollen from plant to plant. So they design things that favor their friends, their bees that help them to pollinate the most. And then they try to discourage everyone else. And sometimes it's at the level. So for example, sometimes for a lot of bees, pollen is toxic actually. Okay, so they know this because they'll take one species of bee and they'll have another species of bee. And what they'll do is they'll take the pollen out of the nest of the baby bee and they'll swap it within the species. Everyone's fine. Like I'm just going to swap these pollen loads around. But if they swap it between species, everybody dies. And the reason is that one species has built up a tolerance to the chemicals that the plant put into the pollen so that it favors them. And then everyone else is like, either this is super distasteful, I'm not going to even touch this stuff, or it's actually toxic. So it's a really complicated world. And that's why we want to look at this as a, let's try and bring in as many different kinds of native plants as we can, because that's going to support all these different little groups that we don't maybe know specifically, but each kind of plant like we have over here is going to be helping a different set of bees. So, yeah, this is a slide and basically saying that every yard in the area, including in DC, really has access to about at least 100 species of bees, right? Now, they may pass over you because you haven't planted anything they like, but if you put in a nice garden, even a few plants, you're going to get those species. So there's nothing magic. It's not like, oh, I have to be near a refuge or I'm not special. It's like you plant the plants, they're going to move in. Okay. For example, downtown on the mall, if you like, the mall is not a great place, surrounded by concrete and the federal government with it, and you know, both of those are a problem. But there are a set of gardens in there, the Botanic Garden, and then by the Natural History Museum, where they planted a whole bunch of native plants. And I have gone there a number of times and done even studies, and it's full of native bees. Like, where did they come from, right? They had to have gotten there by moving from the Anacostia and the wilds and elsewhere and ending up there. And why is that? Well, when a bee comes out of its nest, so it's been sitting in this underground, mom has been dead for a long time. It's a tragedy, of course. And so they come out, they don't have any app. They don't have like, where is the good food? Or I want to be located in a nice neighborhood and blah, blah, blah. They just get up and they just start flying until they find what they're looking for, which is just a plant. And so they're not redlining anything. So National Mall, fine. They're just going to nest in the ground anyway. If it's got the plants, they're there. So you have, I can tell you all these stories about bees showing up on the middle of islands, right? So they're like, we made the mistake of flying across water, but they're bees, so they don't have big brains. And so they're flying into DC all the time. And then neighborhoods are supporting an amazing richness of bees. Next. I really can talk for a week about this kind of thing. Are we seeing? Oh, there we go. Okay, so honeybees. So I've got a picture of a honeybee on here. And so to most people, honeybees are the bee, because culturally, that's all we have been grown up with, right? We get honey, we know it came from the bee, and we watch movies like the Bee Movie, and it's about funny things that honeybees do, which is not very realistic. And over and over again, we hear about beekeepers and beekeeping, and it's just integrated in. But I think most of you probably know honeybees are not native to even the hemisphere. So they were brought in, the earliest date is like 1630, right? So very early on, they brought in honeybees. And why? The reason is not because they needed pollination, it's like they want the honey. And the wax was a very important commodity because, they didn't have chemical companies using petroleum. So wax was used for lots and lots of things in cosmetics and so forth in the old days. But they brought it in because here's a pile of bees in one place. I can point to it and say, there's bees in there. I can get wax and honey out of it. And none of our native bees do that. In fact, the easiest way to think about the contrast between our native species of bees and the honeybee is that everything you know about honeybees, none of that occurs in our native bees, right? So there is no wax, there is no honey, there is no waggle dances, there are no hives, there are no multi-year queens, there is no barbed stings, there's no allergic reactions, and we can just, continue down that list. So so that's one problem I always have is that people, when I say bee, they go to their internal Rolodex and they're like, oh, I know a lot about bees. And none of that is usually relevant to the wild bees. So we'll talk a little bit about that. But basically, most of the wild bees are solitary. So like single mom, she might be nesting in holes. You've probably seen these bee houses people make, or most of them are in the ground. Like right now in this, where you guys are standing out there, you're standing on top of bee nests, almost for sure. It's very difficult to find them, and they don't defend them, right? Why would a single mom fight against any of you guys? You're, first of all, you're very scary, but the second thing is that you would always beat them up, right? They try to sting you. Most of them, a good chunk of them can't sting at all. So they're never going to win. So they're like, okay, I may have to rebuild, or I'm going to dig out because you're stepping on top of me. But you have no interactions, despite the fact you're standing on all their homes. So lawns actually can be a fairly good place for bees. But that's one of the reasons we know very little, is that we have no reason to know anything about them. First of all, pollination was always a gimme until recently, right? So everything got pollinated. We would say, people would ask, like, what was pollinating your crop, Mr. Farmer or Mrs. Farmer? And they would say, see that honey hive over there? That's what's doing it. But half the time, all the honeybees in that hive would go elsewhere because, oh, we like the food, over here in this other field. And the native bees would move into their crops. So native bees are actually doing a lot of agriculture too. Okay, I've really got to hurry this talk up or keep going. Let's go to the next. Anyway, so honeybees are a poor model, and honeybees have their own issues. When we talk about saving bees, we talk about creating habitat and flowers for bees, some of which are used, you can see out here, by honeybees too. But one of the things I emphasize is that bringing in more honeybees into the environment, unless you want the honey, is not helpful to the environment. So ecologically, we don't need more honeybees, and it's not useful. We really want to just build up the flowers, and then the native bees will figure it out themselves. We can talk more about that later. Okay, actually, I want that one. So I want to show that, and so we'll go through several of these slides here. You guys can't see this, but you can go online to our Flickr set and see all of our different pictures of bees. So just think in your mind, all those different sizes, shapes, and colors of flowers. Well, the different wild bees also reflect that. They're wildly different. Some are bright green, some are bright blue. They come out at different times of years. They have all kinds of interesting bee tools to access these very different types of flowers. So each of those flower shapes, there has to be a bee that can get in there, right? And has to pull the pollen out. That is, I think, my cell phone. Oh, it's my daughter. Sorry, daughter. Who I named Red after the bird. But her mother thought I had ruined the daughter at the time. And then, so we couldn't name our second daughter after a bird. But now the second daughter is angry because she doesn't have the cool name. Anyway, so we'll go through. So what you're looking at is a series of pictures of bees, and they're just very different, right? Big, little, most, like I mentioned before, are extremely small. Grain of rice size is the bulk of the bees. So if you look on the flowers, like today, if you wander by all that lovely hyssop and agastache, oh my God, you can see the bumblebees. Those are pretty obvious. Regionally, there's 13 species of bumblebees, but in actuality, most of the bees on there are really, really tiny, and you would just think of them as like bugs. So anyway, that's part of the exploration, and that's part of why we don't know anything, right? On iNaturalist, you can take a picture of a little tiny thing, but you can't identify it, right? So we, again, know bumblebees as a class because they're big, but we don't know individual species of bumblebees because why bother? And then all the small stuff are just like, well, I can't even, my eyes can't resolve that small a thing. But all those different sizes and shapes, this is my main point. Sizes and shapes of flowers are a reflection of the diversity of the bees that you don't see very much, but you can see on our Instagram site, which is U.S.G.S. BIML, and some of our other social media, which we do all kinds of funky techniques, which if you actually were looking on here, you get to see some of them. Okay, so we talked about bees having preferences. So let's go to the next slide. And some are super picky. So there are a whole bunch of bees that only go to one species of plant. So a good example is Pickle Weed, which grows all throughout the Anacostia. Right down at Kenilworth Aquatic Gardens, there's a whole big patch of them. And we've actually gone in there and found the bees that only go to Pickle Weed. And just a little pickle, all right, I have to really control myself. Pickle Weed, the bees, if you look at a pickle weed, it's big, tall stalk, right? Purple on the top, it's way out in the water because no bee can nest out there. So that's the flag. Here's this big purple flag. The bees see that, they move out, particularly if you're a pickle weed bee, and then the individual flowers on there have a really deep throat. So you have to have a really long tongue to get in there because you actually can't even fit into that flower. And then the plant in its working with bees has made it even more difficult to get the pollen out. You might get some nectar out, but to get the pollen out, you have to have little hooks on the tips of your tongue. Your hairs have to be hooked to hook the pollen out. And only those bees have them. So it kind of bakes in this kind of neat relationship. And there's many, so my point again is that there are many, many, many different kinds of very specific relationships. More kinds of plants in the area, the better. And we have lists. I'll show on here, there'll be a link to where you can see a list of all the plants and all the bees. So let's go on. A lot of those very specialized bee systems are either perennials or shrubs. When you get to annuals, the bees can't keep up. When you get to trees, for whatever reason, it's more of a, like, we're gonna invite a lot of bees to our party. So think of American holly. So if you see American holly, it can grow quite large. It has tons of blooms. It's one of these things I call a bee party plant, right? The flowers, if you look at them, are super simple. It's like a kid would draw that flower. There's no complexity. All the pollen nectar is right there. Their MO, we're gonna bloom in the spring. There's tons of bees around. We're gonna invite a lot of bees to our party and pollination is gonna happen. And so you can, and also in these kinds of systems, so all of our fruits are like that. Cherry and apple and peach are also party plants. They bloom for a really narrow time period, right? So if you were a specialist plant, you bloom for a really long period because your bees may not have woken up or, you know, they might not be around, but you have to put in a lot of energy. So the party plants are like, we're gonna bloom for a week and a half, maybe, and we're gonna invite everyone there and we'll get pollinated somehow. So, so anyway, that's why in orchards and stuff, you really don't need honeybees because any bee in the area would go to an orchard because there is so much food there. Like if you look at an orchard, it's in bloom, it's white, right? So are you gonna dink around in the woods or are you gonna be like, no, I'm going to where the party is? So all these bees move in, pollinate, and then they move back out into the environment. Honeybees are doing it too. Turns out they're less efficient. Okay, so anytime you do any planting, if you can, go to that list and say, oh, are any of these bees really supporting only a few kinds of bees? Are any of these plants supporting only a few kinds of bees? Let's plant them first. Okay, let's go to the next slide. I'm really concerned about taking too long here. So Andrena Bradleyi is just an example of a bee that pollinates blueberries. So it's got a very long face. Think of a blueberry blossom like a vase. You have to have a very long face, and you also have to sing a song to the blueberry plant. And you do that by buzzing at a certain frequency. Why do you do that? First of all, honeybees don't know how to do this, but you do that because the pollen is not sticking out on these anthers like most plants are, where you can just come and pick up the pollen, right? How do bees do that anyway? They don't even have fingers, but different story. But in these, which includes tomatoes, same thing, right? You have to go up to a tomato and then you, or a blueberry and several other groups, and you have to buzz at a certain frequency and it knocks the pollen out of these tubes. So all the anthers are now in a tube. They have holes at the bottom like a salt shaker. They don't come out unless you buzz them, right? And then the pollen comes out and basically the bee, you know, rubs around in there and picks it up, moves it to wherever it carries it, takes it back to the nest. But if you don't do that vibration thing, which native bees know how to do, you don't get anything. Honeybees, not native to the area, they don't know the song. So they're actually very poor pollinators of things like cranberries, blueberries, tomatoes, and several other things. And because they're generals, they're like, well, we need food all year round, so we're going to try a lot of different things. So they make it work, but they hate those crops. So they will, if you put a hive in the middle of your blueberry field, and you'd say, well, those honeybees are pollinating my blueberries. They're actually not. They're like, we're out of here. This blueberries are terrible. And the native bees come in and do the pollinating. And that's why, again, so many asides. So think about when us older people were young, you couldn't get tomatoes in the winter, or if you did, they're like cardboard, right? So the reason you can is they figured out, oh, we can, let's back up another time. So you can put honeybees into a greenhouse with tomatoes in the winter, but they all go to the window and just do this until they die. But bumblebees, again, who know the song, they now know how to commercially raise them. And you can get bumblebees whenever you want, all through the year. And what the greenhouse growers do, Canada, US, wherever, in the winter is they buy colonies of bumblebees and they put them in the greenhouse. And the bumblebees are like, we're good. And they just do all the pollinating. They know the right song for tomatoes. We get good tomatoes in the winter now. 3 minutes? Really? 3 minutes? Come on. Okay. All right, let's go. All right, there's the list. It'll be online. I can't believe it's the 3 minutes. You guys are so cool here. Okay, let's go to the next. And let's go. Keep going. And so Pollinator Mixes, I'm going to downgrade a lot of the stuff that you can go to Lowe's. It says wildflower mix for pollinator mix. Most of those are things that manufacturers of seeds like to grow that will get you something that looks like a flower right away. Better go to, buy native plants or grow them yourself from, companies that sell them and plant them as plants. And the other thing about seeds, you can chill up anything and plant your wildflowers, but guess what? There are like 5 million times more weed seeds in there. And they're not going to like, oh, well, we won't grow. We'll let those little wildflower seeds grow. You just get weeds. Okay, keep going. So I'm except under weird circumstances, it's not worth planting seeds in the ground, but you could grow them in pots actually, which we do all the time. Okay, skip that. Oh my gosh, so many things to talk about. Skip that one. Look at the beautiful bees. And so, yeah, I have a good example of some native plants that really are attractive to very rare bees that have shown up because people planted them, like the heucheras. Only the native heucheras, not the bastard heucheras that you get at the big box store, which are some kind of weird hybrid with European, Asian, and American heucheras, which the native bees don't like. Keep going. Sorry, we're going to go through a bunch because I want to get to the gardening part. And keep going. And there's bees that only go to chestnut trees. You can see what I like to talk about. Okay, and keep going. And keep going. Very soon. Shouldn't have talked about my childhood. Example, Mount Cuba. If you go up there, they had basically a junky old forest. They planted a lot of native plants and a lot. It's a really great example to see what they've done. And I have friends who've gone up there filled with really rare bees. So
Where's that?
It's in northern Delaware.
Oh, okay.
It's worth the trip though. It's magnificent. And until recently, you couldn't even get in. They just did their own thing. But now it's open. Next. But it's a good example. You plant it, it will come. These are records of bees that were not known from any of the intervening states. You had to go to Ohio to find. Keep going. Sorry. And Sidwell Friends School in downtown DC. So I had some friends who are teachers there, so they would have the kids catch bees. And it's completely surrounded by cities. The campus itself is all squished in. There's hardly anything in there too. But they got 80 some species of bees just from the kids doing these surveys, which was sort of hodgepodge. So it's just a good example that, don't write off any place in the city as like a place that you can't grow or have bees come in. You plant something and they're going to come. Next, also in that's Northwest DC, there's a lot of neighbors that are planting things too. So it's supportive in a way. Here's a shot of downtown Baltimore of the harbor. So we're talking about heavy duty industrial park, where we have docks, we have abandoned railroad lines and weeds everywhere. And at this time of year, we went up, which is one of the low ebbs. And in a day and a half, we found almost 50 species of bees just on that one venture. So again, the last place that you would think about, other than National Mall, that you would have bees, there were tons there. Okay. So again, I'm just really emphasizing, like, you have as much opportunity as anyone else to be supportive, and they're small, and your house becomes a refuge, right? You're not bringing in wolves and bison, but you can bring in lots of bees. Maybe later, the wolves and bison. Okay, here I have an example. Okay, now this is my, how do you do this easily? And one is get the app on your cell phone called Chip Drop. Okay, so arborists and people who grind up trees, cities and things, they need a place to drop these chips off, right? They have to pay, they have to go to Largo basically, pay to drop their chips off. They love it. You say, I want a load of chips. They're going to give you a whole truckload. They'll drop it off for free. And then what do? You go to any lawn. So this is ready to go for making in the pollinator garden. Don't do what they say online all the time, which is, oh, I've got to put down newspaper, or I got to dig up all that sod, or I've got to lay down cardboard. You just dump about 8 inches of chips across everything, okay? And then you are ready to plant. You just make a little crater in there. You take a plug. Now you're not planting seeds, you're planting plants. You plant right in there and you tuck it in enough that the plant's not smothered. You're good to go. This kind of grass here, other than Bermuda grass, which is like, can't be killed, they cannot penetrate through those chips. Bermuda grass can, but they're struggling too. So it's pretty easy to control the Bermuda grass even in there. And then, like, the picture online was of a gravel parking lot that was part of where I was working. And literally, you can still see the gravel. It's still a parking lot. We just buried it in chips. Like, we did not do anything other than that. It's still a gravel parking lot under there. And we have tons and tons of native plants. And within 2 years, it was full. So it's really something relatively straightforward. And with Chip Drop, you get all the chips you want for free. And so you can just bury, and then you can stockpile the rest, because in subsequent years, it's good to take some chips in like March and put a thin layer over everything, because that will bury whatever seeds have migrated in from, seeds are blowing around all over the place, and most of them are weeds. And it'll just bury that. You have actually a very low maintenance thing. And I'll also say that, the soil here, like the soil where I grew up, is probably pretty bad, right? It's from the building site. It's spread out. It's compacted like all get out. So you could go, oh, I'm going to amend it with compost and I'm going to rototill it. Like, don't bother. Just put the chips on, and it creates this environment where all the fungal community is like, oh my God, all this wonderful food, all this wood. Then the earthworms are moving in and all kinds of insects, and they essentially will rototill that soil into compliance. You can see online that I have a picture of an old septic field, which was literally just clay dumped there. And we did the same thing, and you can just break apart that soil now. So in these environments, you can do that too. So when you add the chips, you're actually helping the soil out, which is always the keystone, because you don't do any fertilizing or anything, because the native plants are designed not by people who garden plants. It's like they're designed to be fertilized and tended and pumped up with nutrients. The native plants don't want that much, so they get too leggy and they'll fall over eventually. So that's essentially the system. And I'm getting the eye here. Okay.
I'm coming into the frame.
I think we are.
I'm coming into the
have
frame.
The last slide, which is just my contact information. One or two more. Oh, that's my yard there currently. And also, when you do a lawn flipping, you want to present to your neighbors really well. So you want a weed whacker. That's the only tool I have left. And you want to trim the edges of your walkway in. You want to trim the edge by the street, and you want to trim your neighbor's fence line, because you Otherwise, I think you've abandoned your house, right?
Right.
And so if you do that and you show that you're taking time and you're, part of the handshake deal, and I'm putting effort into this, and you have a little bit of graphs there, it shows that you're taking care of your place. And what you do in the middle in all those garden beds, it's like, wow, there's crazy amounts of flowers. That's fine as long as you have these small trimmed areas that are what the neighbors look at.
Right.
Okay, I'm done.
So
For real.
Yeah. That's Sam's information. That's up on the screen. Anybody that's looking, they were looking at the phone. So
Okay.
they did see
Oh,
your
good.
presentation.
Okay.
We figured it out. We
So
said everyone has
high-tech.
a phone,
Yeah.
so you can see the presentation.
Oh, nice.
Anybody here have any questions for Sam? I have a couple before we jump into the garden. If you guys are standing in the sun, you may want to get in the shade because I'm going to put you back in the sun soon.
Wow.
Anybody have any questions? Yes.
The Carpenter Bee question. There's always that. So Carpenter bees are native. We have only one species. And so the question always is like, oh, they're eating whatever.
Yeah.
So
I'm just always fascinated by it because I see all of the
Yeah.
sawmill below the whole.
well, here's a
Yes.
cocktail party fact that everyone can use now, which is that Carpenter bees lay the largest egg in the entire insect world. So I don't know how that'll get you, but no one else
So
does that.
yeah,
And
and they eat our fences.
They do. So in terms of that, one is if you have a lot of carpenter bees and you don't like them, well, guess what? It's your fault for having yummy
food.
soft wood. They like soft wood, so particularly cedar, redwood, and fir. So when you're thinking about your picnicking table and stuff, they're going to nest underneath. Their holes are always under. They don't defend. They don't sting. Like the females are designed to look like a bumblebee, but they don't sting like a bumblebee. So you can, plug up their nest with your hand, and you're not going to have a problem. The males are guarding a set of territory, and they're not aggressive. They're just not smart. Any movement, and they're like, what's going on? Are you another carpenter bee that I need to beat up? And so they're in your face, but no males sting.
Right.
And you can tell the males because they have white on their face, a big white patch. So again, a good cocktail party thing is you're out on a barbecue or you're on your deck, there's carpenter bees around, you see a male come up, you just grab it, and then everyone's like, whoa, you just grabbed a bumblebee, and then you can hold it and let it go, and you're going to go. Hands of steel. And you don't have to tell them anything else, because they'll remember that.
So thank you for that question.
I'm sorry.
Any others?
Can carpenter bees see? Because I noticed they'll like bump into the window. It's like, oh my
They're
god.
not smart.
Okay.
So the window to them is like air, because they're not like, oh,
Bump
it's
into the
actually
window.
solid air. They're just like, oh,
And they're big and
but they can't hurt you.
okay.
The one question I had, Sam, and it may have occurred to some of our participants. So there's been a lot of talk about the decline of the bee population.
Right.
So is that all of the bees that you were speaking to, or is that just the honey? Because it seems like every time, it seems like the honeybee is the poster child for we don't have any more, So, but I mean, but what you've taught us today is that there's a couple hundred different bee species in
Right
DC.
here. Yeah.
There's over 400 in PG County. So are all of those bees in jeopardy because of our practices?
Okay, there's several things. Honeybees, because they're so radically different, fortunately for us, have a very different set of problems. So we're going to set that aside.
Okay.
Mostly introduced diseases.
Okay.
And you can't, by the way, help a honeybee by putting in a hive, right? That's not a solution to their problems.
Okay.
But the other problem in terms of all the rest of the bee species, so almost all of them are still around in different places, right? So that's a good thing. Except for endangered bumblebees, which have a separate problem. But the basic problem is this. See this building? At one point, that building was not a building, it was woods or something like that. That has a lot of bees, that has zero. That road out there, At one point, there was a lot of lovely habitat, you know, all kinds of things going filled with bees. How many are there now? 0. So you just count up all the sidewalks and any building project that's going on in the area, that's zeroing out all the bees in that area. So the biggest problem is really just straight destruction, right? So it's not like mysterious pesticide problems or some weird disease. It's just like we're using up the land.
Right.
And so that's another reason to try and recover some of the places that we used up, right? So we have a building, nothing's going to happen there. Maybe a green roof, marginal. But look at this. This is all this grass here. So this makes sense. We're sitting here, we're using that. What about that big patch of grass on the road in? Like, nobody uses that. That's not useful. There may be a few bees nesting in there, but it's really not a contribution because grass is not used by bees, even when it has its flowers, which is the grass head, right? So that could be converted, and that could be a positive. Every time we make a lawn somewhere, even if we're like have a pollinator-friendly lawn, whatever that might be to people, that's really a negative, right? Because most of the pollinator plants, like white clover, not native. It has bees that are happy with pretty much anything. So let's call them the crow and sparrow bees move in. You want to bring in and establish plots of land that have flowers on them.
Okay. So, and that's a great segue for what we're doing. So today we're going to hopefully, we've changed a little bit of the back of the museum into bee friendly. I was excited. I was excited to learn. It's a great thing about gardening is we always learn. So I just learned about the bee that we need for our tomatoes. And so we have that bee because we have tomatoes.
Yeah.
So today, what I wanted to discuss today was soil, and I'm going to give you the 10-cent tour on soil because a lot of my garden warriors know about it. My new folks, please ask someone. So soil is alive. It's loaded with nutrients. It's loaded with organic and inorganic materials. Today, we're going to break up topsoil, compost, and a mix that we do for you guys to take home. We're also going to use some of the compost. I started using the compost in the bags because during the pandemic, there's a place called Maryland Agriculture that produces a lot of compost, and people wanted it so much that we got compost like at the end of 2020 that was so raw it wasn't cooked enough, and I put it down on a lot of people's gardens and it burned everything out because it was still breaking down. It was, and we've talked about composting, but anyway, so soils. There's a lot of information. If anybody wants any of that information, I have outlines and stuff about soil. Contact Katrina and I'll share that with you, or talk with one of the long-term garden warriors and they'll tell you why soil is so important. So we've also got to do some housekeeping today because believe it or not, even though it feels like it is probably close to 100, it's time to actually get lettuce and arugula planted, because the plants that we plant now, by the time we get to this time in August, are going to be big enough that we can start thinning them out for microgreens, and then we'll be able to have the bib. This year I'm doing bib lettuce and the native arugula. So that's what we're going to be planting. We've had a mishap in the garden, and as all of you know, it happens. It's the life of a gardener. The squash plants that we had became overrun by squash beetle. So we got those out. It completely destroyed them. We've added 2 green peppers and 1 habanero. My young lady from Trinidad is not here. I think she's actually in Trinidad, but when she comes back, we'll have habaneros for her. Or as we call them in Trinidad, Scotch bonnet. So we're going to harvest tomatoes today. We're going to harvest radishes. There was an excessive amount of water and then an excessive amount of heat. So I'm going to take all the radishes out because they've started to explode. They've started to split because they've taken on too much water. So we may be able to get some radishes. We're gonna check our beets. There's some that are probably ready. We've got tomatoes, we've got jalapenos, and another spicy pepper that we're gonna harvest. And then we're also gonna talk briefly before we get into the garden. Today's takeaway are plants that I knew Sam would be touching on and plants that we can add into our garden. Some of them are natives, some of them are hybrids of natives. So they should still put similar bill.
It's a spectrum. So
yeah. So we've got two types of coneflower, which are the pink and white plants. Those are called the powwow variety. And what they've done is they've taken Echinacea purpurea and they've gotten it, because sometimes coneflowers will be tall, sometimes they'll be short, and they've isolated that gene that makes it smaller, and they've created a hybrid, which is called powwow. If you don't have the space in a garden for a echinacea that's going to grow this big, you can now do the powwow. We've got rosemary. I know everybody has had rosemary, but rosemary is a great pollinator. And it's so it's a really good one. I've got lavender in there also. Now you'll see a lot of honeybees come to lavender, but I've seen other bees. You would be able to identify them. I just know that there's not a honeybee and they like my lavender. I also brought in, because I knew you were going to talk about the adverse conditions of having a lawn. And I don't know that it's a native, Sam, but I do know that it's a great way to get rid of lawn, and that's using steppables. And the little pinky purple flowers that you're seeing, that's actually a creeping thyme. So it's a type of thymus, but it's a creeping thyme that you can put in between steppers on your garden and things like that. It flowers all summer long, and I always have activity of something on that. And then this one is actually a marginally hardy plant in this area. For some reason, the Purple Verbena, which is the homestead purple, tends to be a soft perennial. So it'll go a number of years. And if we get a really, really, really cold winter, then it'll zap it out. But so the homestead Purple Verbena, which is also it really attracts, I know it attracts honeybees. I'm not sure how many natives it does. And then of course we have the Rudbeckia, the black-eyed Susan, which is really, really great. So everybody who has pruners, I want you to grab pruners. Milfito, Berto. I'm gonna get them to do some digging out. Yes.
The squash is a Native American, the Three Sisters. It also has its own bee species that only go to squash at dawn. That's why they open. Why do they
open at dawn, right?
And they're like done by 10.
Yeah, and I've when you talked about hollies and a couple of other varieties, some apples, I've also taught everyone here that the other thing about squash, and I didn't know about the particular bee, but they definitely have to be cross-pollinated. Because if you only have one squash plant, you'll never have a squash. You'll never have fruit because it has to be cross-pollinated.
Yeah, those squash bees are everywhere.
Yeah.
So you plant the ones that were here. There's these squash bees on them. And you go out before dawn when it's just gray. And there's just all this zipping around. It's like, are those honeybees?
No, they're the squash.
Honeybees don't get up for a long time.
So, folks, not only do our squash need cross-pollinating, but there's a squash bee that comes out in the morning when you're having your coffee and decides to pollinate our squash plants. Let's get in the garden.
All right. I'm going to probably mosey.
Yes, Sam. Hey, everyone give Sam a round of applause. Thank you so much. Thank you so much. And you have his website. Please reach out to him.
And I got to go up on my roof and fix it today.
Okay.
So
oh, my God.
I would love to
be there. All right. Thank you, Sam. All right. We'll be in touch.
Take care.
De las Palmas. So who has a set of pruners? All right. So we're going to open one up and put it on the ground there. Can someone help my guy just spread one or two trash bags? Beto, por la grama ahí, póngale dos. But Beto, flat. So we're gonna take out These are the Brandywine, which are the heirloom tomatoes that we planted. We're gonna actually take these out. They've never recovered. They got burned. They've never recovered. And what's happening as the leaves are getting less and less, does anyone want to speculate what's gonna happen to the fruit? Because one of the things, can somebody tell me one of the things that a leaf does for our vegetables? All of that. But if I were a bird and I were looking around for some fruit or tomato and I had, can you tell how many tomatoes are in there or no? You can tell how many are here because the leaves are gone. So what's going to start happening, and these, what you do with a green tomato, it's really sad because these are Brandywine. So these are heirlooms. But what you do is the methane gas of an apple. Do not sit it on a sunny windowsill. Put it next to an apple and the tomato will ripen. It will use the methane gas that the apple is giving off and it will ripen on your countertop. If you put it in a sunny windowsill, it's probably just gonna rot. It'll ripen, but it's gonna be, no, doesn't matter what type of apple. See, this one's starting to change already. This one is mature enough along that it will change. This one, you may want to use it in a green tomato salad, or if you like fried green tomatoes. But we're going to harvest this. So I need to get 2 people over here, harvest these, put them on the plastic that I'm going to have my guys. Can you get him to spread 2 pieces of plastic out for us? Okay, we got it. Okay. And then someone take the time to cut. See, like this one here. This one has a soft spot. So whoever takes this one, be careful because this is probably going to rot away. So you probably want to use it as a fried green tomato. All right. Yeah, and since you have your pruners, you're going to be assigned to cleaning this up, cut it all the way down. What we're going to actually try to do, we're going to leave these here. We're going to try to see if they will. We've got about a month and a half. We're going to try to see if we can cut all of this back and be careful. You got a couple big tomatoes and see if this shoots back out. Basically, if we have a warm September, we might have enough time to get another crop if these regrow. Maybe not, but maybe. We'll at least try it. And once this is cleaned up, let me know. Over here, guys, where's Nafita? What we're gonna do here. And my guy's coming with if you want to be in charge of this is our radish bed. What we're going to do is, and be careful, anyone that's digging in the bed today, my irrigation system is back up and running. So be careful where we cut. There's a nice one. So what I want us to do is lift everything up in this center. Be careful. There's some over here. Be careful here because these are my onions. Remember, we planted onions by seed. Next workshop, we're going to divide these out and we're going to plant these in proper rows. But for today, all we're harvesting out, he's going to help you lift it up. We're going to clean it off. And we're going to clean this part out. And then we're going to also check. There's at least 1 beet that's ready to go. Let's check the rest of the beets. Nice beet. And we're going to check these because we don't have to. Beets are not going to care if it's hot. If it's not ready to pull today, don't pull them. The same thing with our onions. Our onions actually are going to grow all the way to next year. Okay. So in our September, not in our August workshop, but in our September workshop, we'll be able to harvest some green onions, but then the rest we're going to leave in for the winter.
Are these going to get bigger?
The
I
onions?
get them and I always pull them up.
No, but these are not the ones that are wild.
Okay.
These are ones that we planted.
Okay.
And it's a long season onion. So this onion needs more than 6 months to mature. The ones that we get in this area are actually short season onions that will mature in 3 months, but they'll never get as big as a Vidalia. All right. So vamos a arrancar todo eso, ¿no, Fito? Y limpiamos. All right, next group over here. We're going to probably need one of your workshop bags. What I want us to do, and let me get two people over here. All right. This is a Fresno chili pepper. What I want us to do is you snap it away from the way it's hanging and then twist. And it comes right off. That's protecting the rest of the plant. We're going to go ahead and harvest the Fresnos, which are these, and they're these. And then we've got jalapenos here. We've got green peppers. Now, what I don't want you to do, any green pepper that's not shiny. You see how this is dull as compared to this one is also dull. I think none of these are really ready to go, but this one is shiny. This one I can take off, even though it's a bit small. And this one I can take off. You see how this has a bit more of a sheen? And when it's young, it doesn't. So we want to leave those. I think that's it for green peppers, but we've got a lot of chilies to go home today. She's going to put this in a bag here. So if you two want to harvest these out for me, that's great. What Sam was talking about with the bees, this is the native form of the coneflower. So today you're going to take home some of the hybrid, but this is the native. This is what Sam was talking about. All right, I need 3 or 4 people to help me with the tomatoes. You've got some experienced tomatoes. Let's do some. So I've got lots of tomatoes for you guys today. What I want us to do is just pull it away if it comes off easily. If it doesn't come off easily, twist it. Okay, where you've got groups like this, what I want you to do is only take the ones that are starting to show color. Okay, take those over to the work area there. This one's showing a little bit of color. So before our next workshop. And what I need is two people to just go through here, just look in, because if we leave them and they rot, it's not going to be good. And the rot is going to attract more animals. We would like to get them. Now this one has split because it's split because of water. So it's not, bugs haven't gotten into that one. That one's still very, very edible. But what we want to do is we want to peek in, and in the understory, you're going to find our tomatoes. This one has a little hole, but it can be cleaned up and it can still be eaten.
Oh, okay, because they were taking those ones. Okay, but what if they're too very green like this?
What was the question?
Oh.
If they're really green like that, leave them.
Okay.
Leave them be for now. And don't twist that. That's a slug. It's okay. Don't twist them around too much because you'll disconnect them.
Okay.
But what you can do is, it's a visual thing when you're harvesting your tomatoes. We've let these, some we put in cages and some we let ramble. What you want to do is you want to go in and look in the understory. Remember, the plant is actually hiding. Yeah, that one's gotten eaten by something. So we want to go ahead and take that away. You can cut that piece off and you can still use it in a nice salad with some vinegar and oil. Okay. Keep looking through here. Any of the ones that are a little bit too far along and maybe won't be ready for the next workshop, we want to try to go ahead and harvest. If you see rot like that, can we get down in here with the camera? If we see rot like that, what you want to do, you want to take that out of here. So you want to take that rotten tomato out. We're going to throw it over there. And the reason you get that out of there is that rot attracts other animals to the tomato patch. Okay? But right now, that's about everything for this harvest. Yeah, something's gotten in there and eaten a little bit. So go ahead. No, we can use that one. Now let's go to the last patch of tomatoes. And let's take a look at this first. So, Miss Candace, I want us to, Margaret, can I get the seeds, please? I want us in this bed here. We've got no, what I want to put in here is actually, I want to put the mix. We've got rainbow mix of carrots and we've got radish. What I want to do is do the radish closest to the beets and then do the carrots closest to the onions. So do 2 rows, get some folks to help you with that. The arugula, I'm actually going to do here. So where's the young lady that's with you? Oh, okay. I was going to put her to work. Now I'm putting you to work. Oh, that would have been a great idea. Wait till she comes back. I'm telling. So what I want you to do with the arugula, watch your hand. I just want you to sprinkle it like that.
Okay.
And then I want you to do that. Okay. And you can push a little bit more. That's a little bit too much on there, but the plant will come up and it'll have a nice strong root growth. Okay. Level off the soil first.
Oh, okay.
And then go ahead and do that. Don't use all of this. We're going to give some of this to people that want to take it home.
Okay. What percentage?
Not even half. You see what I spread? I got put about that much on your, and then
Gotcha.
sprinkle it for that area. So you want to do, 8 times that. Okay. All right. Let's go over to this other tomato patch. Yeah, no, that one we can get rid of.
Throw it in the woods.
Yeah. You can
Throw stuff here.
Yeah. This guy is ready to go. See how shiny that is? So let's go ahead and break that off.
Is that the habanero?
They're green.
That, yeah. Right. It's a green pepper. That one's a green pepper. No. These tomatoes also had the same infection that the other ones had. So what we're going to do is we're going to take the cages up.
Right.
Give those to one of my guys, or just toss it on the outside there, and they'll take it away. I need us to pull up the tomato plant.
Wow.
Okay. And then I need, once you get
Hey, Derek, can you hear me? You're frozen a little bit, Derek.
we're just gonna sprinkle. We're just gonna
Apologies, everyone. Technical difficulties. We'll be right back in a second.
we're pulling up these tomato plants because we've been trying for over a month, like the Brandywine. We've been trying for over a month to get them back. And with raised garden beds, our biggest challenge is oftentimes real estate. So we've got the perfect opportunity today. And what we're going to plant in this area where they're digging up these plants is a Bib lettuce. We're going to sprinkle lots of seeds because in a month, we're going to come in and harvest and thin. We're going to harvest microgreens and we're going to thin those lettuce plants out and we're going to plant them in other places. We can start interplanting them in the peppers in a month, okay? Because the peppers are going to be waning. They're going to be towards the end of their life cycle. So what we're doing right now is, and go ahead, don't be shy, just take the soil, move it around like this. Be very careful when you're planting because remember we've got these irrigation tubes. Try to keep those uncovered. Okay. If we can. If we can't, it's okay. And once we've done that, then what we're going to do is we're going to plant the seeds. Okay, the seeds are going to be from here. Yeah, when you open that up, be careful because they're tiny, tiny, tiny seeds. And we want to do about 3 teaspoonfuls. Yeah, be careful. They're tiny seeds. We want to do about 3 teaspoonfuls in every section there, just spread that all the way across. Okay.
What's a good measure?
Here. Let's see. So that's about a teaspoon.
Okay.
So you want to do about that much.
And then where?
You can do it in your section. So from that irrigation hose there and from left
Across.
to right, yeah. Okay.
Do I need to bury it?
What do you want to do?
Do them in the middle. Yeah, you can just rub your hand across the top there, and that's buried enough. And then we've got one more here. Katrina, do we have any questions?
There are no questions.
Katrina?
Nope, there are no questions.
Can she hear me? You had muted it.
Derek, there are no questions. Can you hear me?
Yeah, now I can.
Okay.
Perfect. All right, so we're getting the lettuce in. These are a couple of weeds that we need to get rid of. So right now, let's take a look at where they planted. Right now, let's take a look at where they planted the radish and the carrots. Now, a lot of people think of carrots as an early spring crop or a summertime crop that's planted in early spring. We're going to plant these carrots. We're going to see how they do. And hopefully by October to November, we're going to have a carrot harvest. So let's see. We put in carrots. We put in radish. We harvested tomatoes. We harvested jalapenos and Fresno hot peppers. We cleaned up the Brandywine tomatoes. Today, we didn't do anything with the herbs. The herb garden, that's one thing. Does anybody here today need thyme or rosemary? Yeah. Margaret, hold on to that. That's going to be divided up. So was that a sure? Was that a sure on thyme and, okay. Now, can somebody come close to me and tell me the nice thing that's happening right over here?
The fragrance.
The
Fragrance,
what?
yeah,
Say it
the
loud.
fragrance.
Yeah.
Smells yummy.
So your thyme, you see all the baby plants coming in here. This is from the young man that planted 2 workshops ago, right? Yeah, he did a great job. And the one thing that you got to make sure with herbs in the summer, if you prune them back like that, you got to make sure if we're going to have really, really hot days that you water. Okay. Well, we've got a nice, Katrina, are we saving some time for you today?
I just need a minute at the end. It's 11:48.
Well, you know, you and I are kindred souls when it comes to the use of thyme in cooking. So. And we've got 2 types of thyme here. We've got English, which is the rounder leaf. And then we've got this one, which is the kitchen thyme.
Can we root this?
You can root it if it's woody, if it's soft. So if it's very, very soft, it's not really going to root. But some of this woodier, the woodier stem like that will root.
Okay,
But I would stick it in water
right.
and let it
And
throw
let
out
it
its
get
roots
its
that
thing
way.
and then put it in dirt.
Exactly.
Mhm.
Anyone for rosemary?
Derek, is that the same thing for like basil and mint?
Basil and mint,
it
the
needs to be
exact
woody.
same thing. It can
Rosemary, a
be
little bit.
soft. It can be softer, but not
Delicious.
really, really soft.
Oh,
Okay.
It can be in the middle. Anybody for rosemary?
oh, yeah.
I understand that basil is a water hog.
Basil likes a lot of water and
Oh.
basil likes a lot of heat. If you
Uh-huh.
see basil for sale in the nursery center before Mother's Day, don't buy it
Well, that's what I did.
because it will die out. And we're gonna, what we do is make sure you're splitting stuff up. We usually put it all on the bag
Yeah.
and we split stuff up for
Oh, okay,
everybody.
put it on the bag.
Yeah.
Put it on
Okay,
the
makes
bag and
sense.
split it up, and
Yeah,
that
That
way
makes sense.
everybody
Everybody
goes
can
home
get
with
some.
some.
for sure.
And I don't think a lot of people are wanting rosemary today, but there we are.
This will just
It's so good with
This will
lamb.
continue to grow.
I love
Yeah.
it.
So, and the sage, I think everybody has sage. Does anybody need sage? Yes, no? Yes? All right, so we will open up this. And this is our herb garden. There are hand trowels for everyone to take home today. Anybody that needs a hand trowel. And this is our sage garden. This is one of these plants is actually an original plant to the garden. One of the first plants that we put in here, and it's still going strong. All right.
So at home, would you necessarily need to be harvesting it
I
now or
know.
you could stay
I
out?
use it a lot
We can-
around
the
Thanksgiving.
sage- the question was at home, do you
dry
need
it
to be
out.
harvesting the sage now, or you can dry it out? If you dry it out, what you want to do is take off any of the old pieces like this, because this is dried in a different way.
Yeah.
So you don't want this.
Oh, okay.
No, I'll take that.
And then, huh?
I say that. and burn
You
it.
And burn them. Oh, okay, yeah.
You
Well,
burn
that's true. You
them?
can burn
The
them.
ones that are
You
old,
roll it
yeah.
up
Oh,
and
yeah.
And
Oh,
and
yeah.
sage
So
the
then
house, yeah.
this, and white sage is better for saging the house.
Oh,
Yeah, white sage.
Okay, thank you for that.
Upside down.
You can hang this upside down, exactly right. Or you can put it in a paper bag,
Mhm. And don't forget it.
close the paper bag, maybe put 2 staples in it,
Uh-huh.
and leave it there for at least 3 weeks to a month, and it'll be ready. You pull it out, and you crumple it up and you break the leaves apart,
Mhm.
and then you have sage for cooking.
Oh,
Or you can keep it fresh if you wanted to. You could put this in a plastic bag, put it in the fridge. Do not wash it until you're ready to use it.
Yeah, I just
Okay.
learned that.
And you put it in the plastic bag, and then for a month or 2, you'll be able to pull sage and use it as you want.
Wow.
Google, you said you only use it for dressing.
Yes.
Google
Google
sage
sage, it's-
recipes,
Okay.
and you'll be surprised.
Oh, wow,
Okay,
yeah,
thank
that's what
you.
I'd like to do.
Chicken pot pie, you put a couple of sage leaves at the
As fresh
bottom
as
of the
it
chicken
is?
pot pie, and then a sprig of rosemary. And you put everything on top of that, your pie crust filling, put everything on top of that, you close it down, and it is infused with the most amazing 2 flavors,
Oh.
rosemary and sage in a chicken pot pie.
Ooh, yum, yum, yum. So do you have recipes online?
Do I have them? No.
Do we?
Yeah,
I mean,
yeah.
does the museum have it? 'Cause that
Well,
would be cool.
actually, Katrina has, if you signed up, Katrina may be able to post. I did some summer recipes, like the cilantro. I call it the salsa garden, but it's things to grow next year at this point. But you can grow cilantro, tomatoes, and onions, and you have a salsa garden.
Oh, cool.
So there's things like that, and then if you want, you can always share the email, and if you send in questions, Katrina will send them to me.
Oh, okay. I've got a question. I planted mescaline maybe too early, about a
Right.
month ago. And it's very, well, I thought I was in the right, because in the past, I have planted in the fall, the cold weather, the leafy one. But for whatever reason, the way I read the instructions, I guess I got it wrong. So these things are they're growing very slowly in a box. And I have a covered box so the deer and the antelope will not play in. And I'm just wondering, and then I started to put some fertilizer. Is it that it's too hot? Is that the problem?
So
with
the
seeds?
question is, she has mixed greens, which are grown as microgreens, and they're not doing well. Does anyone want to tell? And before you guys pack up, I want to get a shot for the people that are watching, just
Okay.
how extensive our harvest is today.
Great.
But we can go over that way because we're almost done with time. Her question was, and I want one of our garden warriors to
Garden
answer.
warriors.
She planted mixed greens, which are spring plants, right? Candace answered before I gave the full question. So the question was, why is it not doing well now? Candace,
Yeah.
it's too hot.
So they're like this big, but I thought they were going to,
Cut them down.
okay.
Take all the leaves that you can harvest. If you're going to put it in a smoothie, if you're going to put it in a microgreen salad, whatever you're going to do, harvest it now. Water the heck out of it.
Okay.
Okay. If you've got it covered, keep it in the environment that you have it in. If it makes it beyond August,
There's hope.
it'll come back with like full on,
Okay.
and you'll get good microgreens in the fall.
Okay.
Or replant them now, like we just planted the lettuce. You can take some lettuce and some arugula seeds with you today.
Okay.
Arugula is a lettuce, but it's an acquired taste.
I
It's
like
a
arugula.
spicy.
Yeah,
Okay.
I planted
Yeah.
it before.
So you can plant that now around your mesclun greens,
Okay.
and that could be for the fall.
Okay.
Okay.
Thank you.
Let's take a look before we
Any
wrap
more
up.
sage? we
Oh
cut
no,
any
I
more
think
sage?
we've got enough unless anybody else wants more. I don't think there was a lot of requests to say. So if we can pan so we can see what we harvested today. We got a lot of tomatoes. It's a really good tomato harvest, a really good pepper harvest.
Yeah.
The radishes did not do well, and I tell you why. They got overwatered. But here's the thing. This radish, even though it's ugly, we've been spoiled by the industry that tells us all plants must be beautiful. Katrina, do we have any questions while I do this?
Hey, Derek, nope, no questions.
So now, if somebody's not afraid of a little dirt, or I have a here, grab onto that.
Radish. That's a
Okay.
radish. Same thing. I love radish. Yeah.
Spicy.
And potato
It's
salad.
gonna be a little spicy. It's
I
spicy.
really like that.
Good. It's spicier. It's
Yes.
spicier than a it is spicier than a spring radish, but it's definitely radish. So just because the plant may be ugly, what we can do here, and it'll be great in a salad. If you take a couple of these, it's perfect for a salad. So the greens I wouldn't use. They're thorny. They're kind of they're prickly. Yeah, they're not nice. But this stuff you definitely can take.
But radish is good for your, for the body. There is for your.
They may be good for circulation. They may be
Yes.
actually good for urinary tract. They've got a lot of medicinal properties. I
Okay.
don't know what they all are,
Okay.
but definitely as I clean this up, you know, there's some baby radishes for
Okay.
folks.
Like somebody ready to rinse it off and
So-
pop it in my mouth.
Yeah, right?
We can
Straight
leave
from
the
the
greens
earth.
behind. Margaret can recycle that into the garden, but this stuff has been pretty much gone through. The rest here, have at it. So that part needs to be done. Katrina, I think we're almost at the end of the workshop, right?
Yep, sure.
Okay. Well,
I'll
listen,
close this out. If you have any
Hey,
last
thanks
thoughts.
everyone for being here in the heat. Hopefully you learned something about bees and the importance of bees. And hopefully it wasn't too much drudgery. Next.
Yeah. I didn't realize there were so many.
Next workshop is when, Katrina?
It's August 27th, Derek.
So August 27th, hopefully by then, I'm gonna have lots of fall plants that we're gonna start putting in, mixing in with what we've got. We're gonna have a tomato harvest that looks like pretty promising. We'll have more peppers that we'll be harvesting. We'll be transplanting some of the things that we planted today. So please come back out, whether virtual or in person. Folks, there's a lot of pollinator plants. I want them all gone, please. So take the plants with you. Katrina, as always, let's give a round of applause to Katrina.
Thanks, Derek.
Thank you so much,
Thanks again
Katrina,
to
for
Sam.
being
So
here. Janelle,
please-
thank you.
Yep.
And we'll see you at the next workshop.
Yep, August 27th, Thriving Fauna. And so I'll be sending a link out for more information by next week. And we will have this video of today's workshop by the first week in August. Take care, everyone. Have a good weekend.
Thank you.
These are the seeds. Okay. Yeah. We're sharing. Yeah. I don't know how.
See what I do.